Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Islamic history is filled with many stories of inspirational Muslim women. In our series on remarkable women, we've covered the story of Eve and Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh. Today, let's review the lives of two other amazing women who we can learn a great deal from, Sarah and Hagar, wives of Prophet Abraham. Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ali to continue our series. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So can you tell us a little bit about Sarah and Hagar, what we know about them?
Yeah, we know a lot from the Islamic tradition, both in the Quran and outside of the Quran, other reports attributed to our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Sarah was the first wife of Abraham, and we know from the Bible that she traveled with him to Egypt. And there she was given a handmaid, Hagar, and later on she gave Hagar to Abraham so that she could have children through Hagar. The Islamic tradition considers Hagar to be a wife, and so too the Bible, though referring to Hagar as a concubine at times, also refers to concubines as wives. So concubinage is something that does not exist now, but in ancient societies, this was something like a marriage.
Maybe let's deal with them separately about some significant events in their lives and what we can learn about each of their characters, both Sarah and Hagar.
Yeah, it may be useful to start with Hagar because she gives birth to Ishmael, and Ishmael becomes now is the firstborn son of Abraham. Abraham, according to the Quran, was praying to God, Rabbi habli min as-salihin, give me a righteous children. And in response to his prayers, Hagar gives birth to Ishmael. Ishmael was about 13 years old when Abraham received the commandment of circumcision, and by this time Abraham would have been 99 years old. So Ishmael, Abraham, and all of the males in the family or connected to the family were circumcised at that time. When Ishmael was still a baby, this is where the story of Hagar picks up prominence in the Islamic tradition. Abraham took the woman and her child and settled them in what was to become what is now Mecca. But at that time it was barren and there was no sign of life. So the Islamic tradition has it that when he, by the commandment of God, was placing them in this region, she asked, why are you placing us here? Because it seemed to make no sense. And when he would not answer, she asked him, is this by the commandment of God? And when he affirmed, she said, in that case, I know that God will not leave us here to perish. That story is retold by Muslims many times in sermons as an example of faith and reliance in God. Hagar had this trust, which Muslims would refer to as tawakkul, that God will not leave her and her offspring to perish in that region in which there was no apparent sign of life.
So what happened after Abraham left Hagar and Ishmael and then he went?
The Islamic tradition has it that eventually she ran out of water and of milk to feed her baby, and she went up on a hillock to see if she might find anyone traveling so that somebody may be able to provide some water for her and her baby, but she found no one. Then she hurried over to another hillock to see from this new vantage point if perhaps she might see somebody. She saw no one, and then she went back and forth between these two hillocks. The Islamic tradition says 7 times. And in response to that, or in commemoration of that great sacrifice of this lady, Muslim pilgrims to this day walk back and forth hurriedly between these two hillocks. They're referred to as Safa and Al-Marwa, or simply Safa and Marwa, which are located in Mecca near the Kaaba, the sacred house of worship. So Muslim pilgrims copy the movements of this lady 1,400 years into the Islamic tradition, and that would be some 3,000 years since she lived.
And what's the significance of that, of us continuing that tradition to this day?
Well, it shows that Muslims do or should have high respect for women, starting with this particular woman, the mother of Ishmael, in that we do not find it odd that we are copying the movements of a woman. We are following the prophets in general, and the prophets in the Islamic tradition are known to be males. But here we have a woman whose footsteps we are actually following. So when a Muslim thinks of following the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we think of walking in his footsteps. Well, here we're walking in the footsteps of this noble woman. To continue that story, the tradition says that eventually she heard a voice, and she didn't know who this was, and she said, well, whoever you are, if you have water, like, speak up. Then it turns out that this was the angel Gabriel, who struck the ground with his wing, and the water gushed up from where he struck, and she began to gather the soil around the water to contain it, and the tradition says he was saying Zam, Zam, which means like stop, to stop the flow of the water. That now is known to us as the well of Zamzam. And it is a well from which pilgrims continue to drink to this day when they visit that site. And they also often bring back that water to share with their family and friends, because Muslims regard that water as having some curable properties, not so much in the water itself, but a hadith attributed to our Prophet, peace be upon him, says that if you drink that water, this is how you pray, including asking God for shifa min kulli da, for healing from every disease. So Muslims to this day drink that water with the prayer to God to cure us of our diseases as we drink that water.
And this is really amazing, I think, within Islamic history, that now we're tracing back even the story of Zamzam and water to Hagar, and that's not really a lot that we talk about or hear.
True. It's a very important story, and the Islamic tradition puts a different slant on the story as it was known from previous scriptures, because previously it was thought that it was Sarah who instigated Abraham, actually commanded him to drive out that woman, the bond servant, as she referred to her, the slave woman, and her child. So that this woman and her child will not share in the inheritance with her son. And Abraham, then obeying his wife Sarah, took the Hagar and her baby. Two traditions are mentioned. In one tradition, Ishmael is a baby. In another tradition, Ishmael seems to be much older, a teenager it would seem, maybe about 14 years, 15 years old. And so whatever the age of the child, they're taken and left in the wilderness apparently to die, which would be odd for Abraham to do, and it would be odd for Sarah to be commanding this. But from the Islamic tradition, saying that God is the one who commanded Abraham to do this, it makes sense, because from where they were settled, that would become what is now Mecca, the center of a new civilization that includes at its very core the monotheistic view of God and the worship of the one God.
So let's focus a little bit now on Sarah. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yes, the Quran says that when news was given to Abraham that he would have a child, which would now become, which would be Isaac, the younger brother of Ishmael, to be born from Sarah. Sarah was in the background and she laughed. In the Quran, not much is made of this. It seems natural. she laughs, perhaps because of joy. And she wonders, how can I have a child when my husband is so old and I'm also old? By this time, Sarah must have been in her late 80s.
Wow.
So she's wondering how she might have a child. In previous scriptures, she doesn't come across very well on this occasion either, because Abraham is said to have asked her, did you laugh? And she said, no, I didn't laugh. And he said, yes, you did laugh. And that's the end of the story. It's like, husband and wife having a conversation, husband contradicting the wife, and in a way proving her to be a liar, and it's left like this. But in the Islamic tradition, she comes across very respectable. Yes, she lost, but that could have been out of joy. Yes, she has some wonder, but that's normal in the Quran, that important figures wonder how God's miracle would come to pass, because things seem to be odd, and it's natural in human beings to wonder. Abraham himself wondered on occasion, Zechariah wondered, and Mary wondered. That's normal, and it's not blameworthy on the individual. So no blame comes on Sarah in the Islamic tradition, either for her response to the news given to her about the birth of her child, or in her treatment of Hagar. In short, I think it is interesting that when we look at women in the Islamic tradition and we see how they're portrayed in the Quran, we get a different view than the way in which women might have been thought of in ancient societies. And it is obvious that the Quran wants to put a different twist on this familiar story to make the women come out in a brighter and better light. So when we read these stories, we should ask, why is the Quran putting it in this way? The answer is simply that we should have a higher view of women than the way in which women were viewed in ancient societies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.